the contradictions aren't the problem. The contradictions are the way into the problem. I've made my way through faithlessness and atheism and philosophical nihilism, his most challenging criticisms of his own faith. Challenge your own ideas, and you see if you have the power of intellect and imagination to respond to it credibly. The thing I reject is God's world, because he created an amoral world in where children suffer. And if in order to escape damnation, you have to accept a world where children suffer and even die at the hands of criminals and wars, amoral human beings, then it's not a ticket to heaven I want to take. Can you understand that?
Welcome to the Subversive Orthodoxy Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mullen, and I'm excited to have you with us. This is a podcast about philosophy and meaning. It is about how we as humans withstand the challenges of our cultures. It is about the general Judeo-Christian revelation of God in the world and how the bloodiest century ever recorded couldn't kill that revelation. It's also about how that revelation, tossed aside as archaic, outdated, and obsolete, may be the very life-giving power we need to resist this distracted techno state we're living in, full of anxiety, depression, and teenage suicide.
It's great entertainment, thrilling entertainment. It's the inside story packed with drama.
Welcome back to part 3 of Dostoevsky with your hosts here, Travis Mullen and Professor Larry Inchasti. Hi, Larry.
Hi, Travis. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
And audience, Larry and I finally got to meet each other in person last week in Santa Barbara. Actually, this week in Santa Barbara, or last Saturday.
Right at the Natural History Museum.
Yes, and we had a great time there. I brought my 2 little boys, and they got to meet him too. They got to meet this mysterious voice they heard on a podcast with their dad that I forced them to listen to sometimes. And they really had a great time with him. And we also had lunch at the Shoreline Cafe, which was fun, right on the beach. Mm-hmm. So thanks so much for meeting me.
Yeah, well, it was great meeting you too, Travis.
We've been talking since last August, so a year and 2 months before we actually met each other in person.
And I'm impressed by the Zoom photography because I was able to recognize you immediately when I saw you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty much what I look like and what you look like.
Yeah. We
wanted to do another episode on Dostoevsky because Brothers Karamazov by itself was his magnum opus, what many have said and what Professor Larry has said, that it was the one book where Dostoevsky felt like he almost delivered what he has been trying to do his whole career. Mm-hmm. And so wanted to make sure that we give it a good look over and get you audience, stuff you can be intrigued by enough to want to read it, because it is a big undertaking to even read it. And some of you may have read it, and some of you may have thought, I would never read a book like that. It's too big. The way he wrote this as a polyphonic novel creates a really cool dynamic for you, the reader, where he doesn't exactly tell you this is the hero or this is the villain, but he actually creates a believable worldview coming from each character.
Yeah.
And just to give you kind of like an overview, the 3 brothers are Dmitri, Ivan, and Alyosha. And Alyosha is kind of like the loving, faithful, kind of like a monk sort of character, forgiveness, loving, compassionate. Ivan is the intellect and reason guy. He does not, he's like done believing in God because of suffering in the world. He has this very logical sense of justice. And And the Dimitri is kind of like the sensualist, just the maybe the party guy. I don't know. The professor can shed more light. I didn't get much into him other than the fight story that he always gets in fights, and his brothers pay off the people to keep him, from being mad at the Karamazovs. And then the father is the just a ridiculous person, almost not believable, but in fact, in life, you do know of people like that where it's like just wretched. Everything's a complaint or a narcissist pity party or just complete. I don't even know how you describe him. Just kind of like the characters from Succession.
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
he's like all of them in one.
Yeah.
And then Zosima is like the spiritual priest who's not just a priest. He's like got a lot of weight. He carries a lot of moral weight and spiritual weight and gospel weight. Like he's a good representation of a believing spiritual leader, as far as I can tell, right?
Yeah. Well, he's sort of Dostoevsky's vision of his ideal spiritual director and teacher, and who he would imagine as being the ultimate representation of the highest Christian wisdom that he can imagine. He put in Zosima.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of the outline of the characters. And then as a polyphonic novel, he's not really telling you who to follow, but giving you these characters in their most as he tried to make them as believable as possible in their psychology and everything so that you could draw your own conclusions and make your own connections and relate in your own way. So that's something I learned in this conversation that has been very exciting because this is a guy in the 1800s. He not only comes up with this idea of a polyphonic novel, but he builds into it some of the deepest psychology and spirituality ever written that people are still talking about it now on every level of theology and psychology and sociology.
Yeah. In fact, you just sent me a new book on Dostoevsky's The Demons. You sent me a link to that today. So people are still mining his works for these contemporary insights into the human condition and spirituality.
Yeah. And after we talked about the underground, I mentioned, I think on part two that we did find De Niro talking about loving the underground, notes from the underground. And actually when he saw Raging Bull script, he said, or not Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, both of them were basically scripts that represented the underground to him, and he wanted to take him on because of that. And I found a video where he's actually saying that verbally.
Yeah.
It's
And
pretty cool.
the
I
reason
mean, did I say De Niro? I mean Scorsese, right?
De Niro, Scorsese in that recent interview owned up to Dostoevsky being the source for a lot of those scripts.
No, that's actually what I meant. Yeah, Scorsese. I said De Niro.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Professor, if you could, I think we'll just jump right in and then maybe back out into the other characters. But
Okay.
something happens in Brothers Karamazov where Ivan is doing some kind of writing and he basically creates a parable.
Mhm.
And the professor told me about it, and then he told me, "Why don't you go ahead and read it because it's very much a standalone thing. Like he wrote this parable, Ivan created this parable. He's like an intellect guy." And if you could tell us about that, and then we gotta kind of explain the parable to everyone before we go into it more.
I'm gonna go a little contextual up for a minute before we get into his parable, because one of the things, like when I would teach this novel, the polyphonic dimension of it is a lot of novels, you have your omniscient narrator, that it's sort of like God describing the events. He went here, he went there, third person for a lot of the different characters. Or you'll have a first person narrator, like in a lot of Kerouac novels, where he's talking in the first person. I went here, I did this, I was with my friend Neil, we did this, we did that. And it creates a kind of one uh, point of view that is the organizing principle of the whole thing. Whereas with Dostoevsky, when we say it's a polyphonic novel, it's not one point of view. It's multiple points of view, and you shift in and out of these characters. And a lot of times, the way you shift in and out of the characters is they have conversations. And there's a lot of Dostoevsky novels take place in drawing rooms and in bars and in people talking to one another. And they're having these Socratic dialogues about all kinds of philosophical matters, but also all kinds of interpersonal matters and spiritual matters. And with the brothers, part of the dynamic of the book is that these guys are really close and they open up to one another and they bare their hearts to one another. And sometimes they want to kill one another. And in those conversations, you get a depth of perspective that you wouldn't get if you had some like third party minor character narrating the events, because
Mhm.
because everything is taking place in the interior life. And when I think I mentioned that when I teach when I used to teach it, I would tell my students, in order not to get confused, just follow Alyosha. Pretend that you are Alyosha and just follow him through the novel. So in the very beginning of the novel, the brothers are meeting up after having not been together for a while. And Alyosha has conversations with both Dmitri and Ivan and his father and his girlfriend. And in all of these conversations, he's modeling a listening heart, right? And the older brothers are kind of like trying to use him as a therapist and sort of confess to what's going on in their lives. And because he's such a sweet guy, uh, they wonder how he's going to respond to things. So, for example, I'll give you the conversation with Dmitri. Dmitri is or Mitya is another name for him. All these characters have like 3 or 4 names, so that's always a little bit of a problem on a first reading. But Dmitri is confessing a engagement that he broke in order to go out with this new woman who he's really in love with. And that's Grushenka. And Grushenka is kind of like this, I don't know, how could we describe her as a very hot, sexy, self actualizing person that is a challenge to him because she's sort of kind of a movie star attractiveness, a Marilyn Monroe or figure or something like that. And in order to break up with his fiance, he broke off with her, but he still owed her like $3,000 basically. He feels like he's dishonored himself by breaking up with his fiance without paying her off, paying what he owes her. And he's asking Alyosha if he can understand that. And Alyosha says, "Well, I can understand that, but you are planning on paying your debt." And he says, "Yes, I am. But have you ever felt passion for a woman so intense that you would do anything, you would commit any crime to be her lover?" And Alyosha says, "Well, no, not that far, but I can understand falling in love with a woman." And he said, "Well, can you understand falling in love with a woman's body rather than the woman?" And Alyosha says, "Well, I think so. And he says, can you imagine falling in love with a body part? And he says, yeah, I guess so. And he says, well, then you could kind of understand that my foot fetish and why I'm so in love with this woman and will do anything and even commit crimes for her. And and uh, and he says, you're you're so innocent, Alyosha, but you understand my heart. And Alyosha says, well, I'm only at the bottom level of the ladder of lust that you've climbed, but I know what the ladder is, and I know how you got there. And so their relationship is sort of built upon Alyosha being an empath, basically. And even though he doesn't understand his older brothers and totally about what motivates them, they feel that he understands who they are. So the same thing happens with Ivan, because Ivan is this intellectual who's written this article about the ecclesiastical courts, in which he argues that the civil authorities should put themselves under the aegis of the clerical courts rather than the way it's currently established in Russia, with the clerical courts under the rule of the civil authority.
Yeah.
Because he says it makes more sense that if you're going to have a theocracy rather than just a czarist autocracy, you would want to honor God above state. And he makes this argument, and this makes him a kind of a folk hero in the monastery, because this Hypno intellectual has just written this, persuasive essay arguing for the superiority of the religious courts. And so he's talking to Alyosha about this, and Alyosha said, "Well, I never knew that you believed in God. I always thought you were an atheist." And he says, "Yeah, but I just thought I could make a better argument for the monks than they could make for themselves." And he says, "Well, then you don't really believe that?" He says, "No, I don't really believe that. I just think it's the other side of the argument. And if you're gonna argue, you gotta see the strengths of both sides." And he says, "Do you understand that?" And he says, "Yeah, I guess I can understand that." And he says, "So you do believe in God?" And he said, "Well, I believe with Voltaire that if God didn't exist, we would be forced to invent him, because as bestial and as irrational."
I Ivan said that.
Yeah, and as he quoted Voltaire, and he said, "And as bestial as men are, the fact that they could imagine a God gives us hope that there is a side that may be redeemable. But the thing I reject is God's world, because he created an amoral world in where children suffer. And if in order to escape damnation, you have to accept a world where children suffer and even die at the hands of criminals and wars and amoral human beings, then it's not a ticket to heaven I want to take. Can you understand that?" And he says, "Well, I kind of understand that." And so Ivan says, "Well, before let me just tell you how I came to this. I've been keeping a scrapbook of all the atrocities that occur every day in Russian society and all of the war crimes committed against children and all of these crimes that God just seems like he turns a blind eye to. And would you mind if I read you a few? And he says, yes. Alyosha says, sure, if this is important to you, I want to know what's on your heart. So he reads him this horrendous account of these soldiers ransacking an enemy village and shooting all the children and their parents in these terrible ways. And Alyosha is like getting very emotional. And Ivan says, well, I'm sorry, brother. I shouldn't have done it. I shouldn't have read that. I can see that I'm causing you suffering. And Alyosha says, no, I want to suffer. I want to see what's on your heart. Read me what's troubling you. And Ivan then goes into, okay, you asked for it, and goes into the next atrocity, and then in which this soldier shot a child, and he asks Alyosha, what do you think God should do about that? And Alyosha says, I think that general should be shot and thrown to the hounds. And Ivan says, well, then you're not the moral, forgiving Christian I always thought you were. And Ivan says, no, I know it's absurd what I said, but I feel your heart and I don't know what to do with that information. And
you mean Alyosha said that at the end?
Alyosha says that.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, that's the polyphonic novel, Ivan.
Yeah, you're kind of in both of their heads at the same time.
Both in both of their heads, and Ivan has his truth. And yeah, if you're there and you're seeing what he's seeing, you believe what he believes, and there is no excuse in God's heaven for letting that guy go free. But on the other hand, that isn't what you thought before. So now, you have to appreciate your brother's motivation out of a sense of moral outrage. And now you've got some new questions on your plate that are going to have to be worked out in the course of this novel, or you're going to feel that the novel promised more than it provided, right?
Yeah.
So how is this conversation gonna come to any sort of conclusion? Is Alyosha gonna take on the passions of his Dmitri, the moral outrage of his intellectual brother, and his own dedication to the teachings of Father Zosima, in a way that reconciles all points of view, or at least brings them into a harmony? And the miracle is that he brings them into a harmony, so that when you get to the end of the novel, you're going, man, he had 3 fireballs that he was juggling in the air simultaneously, and they all landed in his hand in easy succession, like a master. Boom, boom, boom. Each one coming to their conclusion, each one in a morally satisfying, powerful, true way that you go, man, I'm ready for the second volume, which he never wrote. But and Alyosha is in many ways the guy who is the one who's trying to sort this all out, sort out his underground brothers, and his own underground struggles in the course of the book. So he's kind of the hero, but the other brother. I'll think of it this way: Dmitri is sort of commands the plot, and he's the sensualist, and he's the one who has his father is dating his new girlfriend because his father is a cad and a jerk, and he wants to be the sugar daddy of Dimitri's girlfriend, and Dmitri wants to kill his father because he's so in love with Grushenka. And then you have Ivan, who is the brother who's trying to reconcile freedom with morality, God's freedom with an amoral world in his own conscience. And so he represents the ideological struggle in the novel, faith versus atheism, or Christianity versus nihilism. And then there's Alyosha, who's the heart of the novel, the moral vision of the novel, who carries Zosima's vision through it to its ultimate religious conclusion that brings a vision, a Dostoevskian vision to the whole. And so that's how the three brothers work. And then all the other characters are organized around those three passions: the head, the heart, and the head, the passions, and the conscience. And so they're sort of minor versions of each of the three brothers.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the Grand Inquisitor. All right, so shall we go there, or do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the what I don't want to do is brush over it too fast, where we don't explain what the Grand Inquisitor story is, because that I didn't realize it was a standalone. I thought it was some big part of the novel when you first were talking about it.
Yeah.
I thought it was some big part of the novel where it's like a character in the novel, like the whole second half or something. But it turns out to be a brief story that Ivan created in writing within a writing.
Yeah, and it's
but I don't know how it has implications going forward. But yeah, the basic storyline of that. Just explain that. What the story is. What is Ivan's parable?
Okay. Well, this is
start there.
Okay, so now that we know that Ivan and Dmitri and Alyosha are the three very different voices in this polyphonic world, and they talk to one another. And the more they talk to one another, the more complicated it gets for each of them. And if we could read this novel three different times, looking at it through three different points of view. We could read it one time and you're an Ivan reader. Read it one time, you're a Dmitri reader. Read it one time, you're Alyosha reader. Alyosha is the best one to follow for the first time reader, but you can go back there and sort of see what Ivan's all about. And so Ivan just told him, when you're a writer, sometimes you write about the point of view that's not being taken seriously, even though you don't agree with it. You write about a character that isn't you, but you think needs to be heard. And so he wrote for the monks. And then he told his brother, I'm not on the side of the monks necessarily. I just think that we're not taking them seriously. So now he says, you want to hear an original work by me that more clearly states what I believe. And
he's talking to Alyosha.
Talking to Alyosha. And Alyosha says, of course I want to hear. And he says, it's just a parable I came up with, because They used to have these parables back in the Middle Ages that dealt with the problem of unjust suffering and the suffering of innocence. And he goes through like a little litany of medieval works that he's read. And one of them is that the Virgin Mary goes down to hell and begs God to have mercy on some of these horrendous criminals that are paying the price, their atrocities by perpetual suffering. And God says, well, I this is my only way of trying to get a little morality in the world through vengeance. And the Virgin Mary says, well, but I want you to come up with something other than vengeance. I want real reconciliation where the crimes are somehow undone. And so ultimately the story is that God agrees to give the people in hell a 40-day respite from Easter to the 40 days after Easter. And that's the compromise they come up with. So Ivan said, so I thought I'd write a parable about what if Jesus came back today and came to the world that we live in. But I'd make it a difficult test case because I'd have him come back during the time of the Inquisition when the church was burning people and unjust suffering was the policy of the church and of Spain. And Jesus would come back and he would be confronted with a cardinal who would tell him that the church is going to have to put him under arrest and have him burned at the stake the next day.
After they had just killed about 74 heretics last week or something.
After they'd killed 74 heretics, burning them at the stake. And they find Jesus, and he doesn't, when Jesus comes back, it's sort of like he doesn't have a pep rally or a launching party or anything. They just realize that there's this guy who's healing people, and he brought a child back to life who had died, and the word gets out, and so the cardinal knows who he is, and it's kind of mysteriously told where everybody kind of knows who he is.
And the cardinal's like watching from a little bit farther away and sees him raise the child.
Yeah. And so he confronts him and says, okay, I know who you are, but you can't speak because you can't add or subtract anything to the Bible. Because I'm a good fundamentalist Catholic, Roman Catholic. And it's a bit of, Dostoevsky has his prejudices. One of them is the Catholic Church. He attacks from time to time Polish people. He has kind of, there's some politically incorrect stuff involving Poles, and there's some, some anti-Semitism. So he's not a saint by any means, and it takes a bit of,
historical context.
Yeah, and a little
to know where he's coming from.
Yeah, he's human in a Russian working
1860s sort of way.
Yeah, right. You run into him. So the Grand Inquisitor, the cardinal, tells him one of the things that he can't talk, so he's got to remain silent. So Christ, remains silent as the cardinal explains why he has to put Jesus to death. now that he's come back for the second time. And basically, he says that when Christ was in the desert, or Jesus was in the desert, the devil came and tempted him. And he had three temptations. And one was to turn this stone into bread. And if he did that, then he could provide bread and sustenance for the starving people through the magic power of the satanic world. And he refuses that offer. And then the second temptation was to throw himself down from the parapet onto I guess the rocks or something. And
Like off the top of the temple to the stone floor.
yeah, and
quoting that angels will catch you and protect you.
Yeah, and so the angels would catch him and protect him, and it would be a miracle that would prove to the masses that he, in fact, was divine. And he said, I think that's the one where he says, "You shall not test your God or tempt your God." So he refuses that one too. And then the final one was, I'll make you I'll make you the ruler of all nations. Not just spiritually, but politically and powerfully. And he refuses that too. And so the Grand Inquisitor says, and so what you did was you didn't give humanity what they crave most in their free state, as free souls, that what they don't really want, the freedom that you gave them and the moral responsibility you gave them and the God that gives them, attends to their souls and allows them to create and understand their own lives from the inside out. What they really want is miracle, mystery, and authority. And that's what we provide for them in the secular state. So we make all the decisions for them. We run the economy. We make the dogmatic rules that tell them if they do these 5 things, they'll be right with God. And then through our acts of violence, we seem to be almost divine in our capacity over life and death. And that's what you took away from us. But the devil wants to give to us. You may call it satanic, but we call it giving the people what they want. What's the line there? There's that line in the story where he says they don't want freedom; they want bread.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be the captains of their own souls. They want to be told what to do, as long as it keeps them safe and comfortable. Then that's what they want. So
he says, "We have corrected thy work."
Yes, that's the line. Yeah, you
We have
got
founded it upon miracle, mystery, and authority.
Yeah.
In the end, they will lay their freedom at our feet and say to us, "Make us your slaves, but feed us."
Yes, that's one of the lines in the Grand Inquisitor.
And that's a real theme through the whole Grand Inquisitor, is this the people giving over their autonomy or free thinking to the church to get their bread.
Right.
And you can see, when I was listening to it, I'm hearing parallels, not just church, but state,
right,
and work. Work for the corporation, get your pension. Instead of bread, I want my retirement, or I want my benefits. It's this type of thing that satiates the masses.
Yes, any totalitarian system or cult that takes away your interior, the freedom of your soul and the transcendental nature of God to any worldly pursuit um, can become an authoritarian cult that is sort of modeled by the Grand Inquisitor. So
I think another way to say it to make it even more relevant is because most of us don't think of ourselves as in a totalitarian cult,
right, yeah,
but you can hear the echoes of the Grand Inquisitor in every form of authority almost.
oh yeah,
Like in the church when it's oppressive, in the and I mean oppressive like even to me where I would defend the church in a lot of ways, but then there's probably times where I see it I see it violating someone's conscience, like forcing them to believe something
mhm,
or else like they're not in, like
yeah.
a coercive demand of belief would violate someone's interior conscience. Like, oh, so I have to believe this, or you guys are going to reject me,
Yeah.
rather than Jesus' method of giving people time and space to flesh things out.
Well,
An invitation.
and it's also what we were talking about earlier in the Dostoevsky sections on the notes from the underground, where people, I think there's a line in that chapter where I think Ivan says, God gave man paradise, but he wanted freedom instead. But he didn't know how to handle his freedom. So he became a victim to the cults that exploited his own weaknesses, which were also the freedom that God gave him to choose faith. And so there's that paradox of that Ivan's story is a kind of parable of the human condition, you know, uh, the the two sides. Again, it's dialogic, and then there's a conversation here between Christ and Satan's representative on earth. That is only Christ doesn't get any. He can't say anything. It's a one-sided sort of conversation. So at the end of the conversation, the Grand Inquisitor says, well, yeah, I'll put you, now you'll listen to my story and in jail, and then I'll have you executed tomorrow. And Christ kisses him on the lips because he can't speak. And the two things that we probably have to talk about in the Grand Inquisitor is the image of the silence, what that's kind of about, and then the image of the kiss, because those are the two things that Christ does in the story. So when he kisses the Grand Inquisitor, the I think the line is, even the Grand Inquisitor was moved in his heart, but refused to renege on his beliefs,
Yeah.
and says,
Mm.
I won't I won't burn you, but I banish you.
Yeah.
And so he banishes Christ. And so Alyosha is listening to this, and Alyosha kisses his brother on the lips after the end of hearing this story. And Ivan is taken aback and he says, "Hey, that's plagiarism." And he said, "No, it's not plagiarism. Your story is in praise of Jesus. It's not a
Mm.
refutation of him. You're just seeing it the wrong way. This is a story about the power of faith. It's not the story about its powerlessness
Yeah.
or the power of evil." And Ivan says, "Well, I don't know about that. That wasn't my intention. And Alyosha says, no, no, it's, you're on the right side, brother. I know your heart. And this is Alyosha's interpretation of it. And he says, but if that story is what weighs on your heart, I worry about whether or not, I worry about how you can live in this world, being so, having such a dark vision of the world. And Ivan says, well, I'm 20 years old and I have the Karamazian sensual spirit. And I I love the sticky leaves of springtime and the sensual nature of the world. But I know that will only take me until my 30th year living on sexual energy and physical love of just being alive. And so I imagine that when I turn 30, I might just turn my ticket in and break the cup of my bounty in life. And Alyosha says, well, no, 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 you even at the end of your 30th year, there is much, there's things to live for. God is present in the world everywhere. You just don't see it, brother. And his brother said, Ivan says, well, I'll make a promise, Alyosha. If on my 30th birthday, I still have this dark vision of the world and I no longer feel that sensuality can carry me to the end of the road, I will make my way back to you and ask you to talk me out of ending my own life. I'll give you, I'll give you another shot at converting me to your Zosima love of life. He doesn't say it in those words, but close.
Yeah, you could hear his like love for his brother, that I'll at least give you that when it comes that time.
Yeah, and so they make a pact. Now that little pact that they make is doesn't is something that was planned for volume 2 of the Brothers Karamazov that Dostoevsky never wrote. But you could see that he had it in the back of his mind that he was setting up these reunions of the three brothers in their 30s and 40s in part 2. And probably it would begin when they were 30 if he made that the date that Alyosha and Ivan were going to get together again. And that would probably be where part 2 would begin.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I was pretty amazed what he did with the Inquisitor and taking the temptation of Jesus, those three things, and turning them into like themes, and then saying it's very powerful what he did there, where the Inquisitor says, "We are not with you. We are with the other guy." Basically, you rejected those three things that he was offering you.
yeah.
We, in your absence, we've taken them.
Yeah, and
We've accepted the things Satan was offering you, and we are correcting thy work. Like you, Jesus, you passed up power and you passed up empire and you passed up, food for the hungry, when these are the three things you should have done. Security, provide security for your people, provide power over Rome. You rejected all this. We've taken it.
wow.
It's pretty. It's just like completely out of his imagination. Not actually, because he's looking at very powerful church structures of his day and saying this is kind of what they've done. But for him to put those two things together, like the temptation of Jesus saying, "We corrected thy work," and then they take on all those things Satan was offering is pretty. What's the word I'm looking for? Like he constructed quite
A challenging
idea there.
uh, critique that is,
Yeah,
is saying,
it's a complex critique.
it's a complex critique. It's like saying this, this is a satanic construction here, and people embrace it, and and they embrace it, and they know they're embracing it. And these are the Grand Inquisitors who are not afraid to rule the world, and they want to rule the world, and they rule it with these kinds of insights, powers, and energies. And I understand where you're coming from, Jesus, but people aren't strong enough to be free, and people haven't earned their life of freedom and conscience. So we're going to take it over for them. The Grand Inquisitor knows that these programs are arbitrary, and that there's nothing wrong with these people that violate, one rule of the catechism or something. Yeah.
That was what I thought was so like powerful about the Inquisitor too, is that he was so brazen
Yes.
in Jesus' face.
Yes.
He wasn't saying things like the way the Pharisees would have, where it was very you disrespect us. It was more like we are not with you. We are with Satan, and that is our secret. And we're taking from him what you rejected, the last gift he offered, showing you the kingdoms of the world. So it's like he's blatantly telling Jesus, we have sided with Satan, and that's our secret. And that's why we're going to have to burn you tomorrow, because you know this. And
but we
need to keep the people under control with security, giving them security, and not letting them have their freedom, because they will mess it up, and they won't even know what to do with it. They gladly hand it over to us. He spoke in such a way that, and it's Dostoevsky. It's his unique insight on humanity.
Oh,
and this was something I heard in Jordan Peterson lecture on him and Nietzsche, and Solzhenitsyn, saying that Dostoevsky was unique in saying you wouldn't even know what to do with if you had utopia. You are so self-sabotaging by giving up your freedom to someone to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
Like humans are so, I don't know what the word is. Like, I don't know what that is. It's kind of new to me, like that whole idea that we're getting through these guys.
Let's just talk a little bit about the underground, though, because that was Dostoevsky's sort of first pass at this idea.
Well, remember, we did spend our whole part one on the underground.
Yeah, but just its relationship to the
this part. Yeah. Okay.
This notion that God gave man freedom, but God gave man paradise, but he chose freedom. And so the freedom that comes from knowing good and evil makes is the fortunate fall that makes possible the prophets and the coming of the Savior, that provides for an eternal soul in the image of God to come to our awareness and our practice. But it requires of us the ability to see through our own this temptation toward the underground, which is to put your will over your reason, to give you the comfort and the security and the power that you think you want, when you, as Jordan Peterson says, you wouldn't even know what to do with it if you had it. So all these figures like Taxi Driver that are in these movies, they're all perfect examples, self-made personal kings of their own arbitrary whims with no end in sight or no view of how or why to use them in any particular way.
Now, what is Dostoevsky and the Inquisitors saying when they? I'm not saying it's wrong. I just don't quite understand why. Why is freedom unbearable for mankind? Why do we want security? Or how is freedom, kind of contradictory to security, I guess?
Well, in Notes from the Underground, he says that it isn't that we want security, we want the fulfillment of our whims. And he said in one of those,
Isn't that what we perceive to be freedom?
yeah, yes, we mistake freedom as the fulfillment of our whims. And I think it's in the Demons, where he has one of the characters who is a very staunch revolutionary anarchist, terrorist, blowing up buildings and everything. And he gives up his entire brigade for a cigarette. And it's just, he had to have a cigarette. And so the interrogator said, well, okay, tell me where these guys are and I will get you. So he gave up the entire brigade. And then,
Oh, wow.
and so he's, vilified by his cadre, and he's there, lamenting the fact that he betrayed everything that he believed in and he stood for over the whim of a cigarette. And these addictions are, addiction is another false god that you serve, and it gets in under your skin, and it's a taskmaster that has, that will give you what you think you want, which is momentary comfort and respite from freedom and responsibility. But you if, as Alyosha knows, if you're just not afraid of suffering, if you're not afraid of responsibility, if you just throw your, there's a scene where later in the novel where Alyosha says, he's just having one disaster after another in his relationships with his brother and with his girlfriend, and he's got problems with Zosima's legacy, and finally he just says to God, just bring it all on, just give me everything now and I'll deal with it, but I just don't want to have to struggle anymore with thinking I have to solve these things. You take over. It's very powerful and it's very moving, and Zosima has his moments like that too, where he realizes, all this control I'm trying to have is not really what I want, or I don't even know how to use it, and I have to find a way of serving rather than taking, because that gives me a little more clarity as to how I can be of use in my life and have meaning in ways that aren't just, satisfying my own whims. So that, we talked about that with Kierkegaard. It's the move from the ethical to the religious, right? The trying to be a knight of faith where you're serving the good all the time, and then realizing that you don't really know the good all the time, and you're going to have to trust a higher power than your own plans and schemes if you want to live in harmony with a world that seems logically and ethically so out of whack, which is what Ivan sees so clearly and makes very clear to Alyosha that this is a problem and it can't be ignored. It has to be addressed, and maybe not as easily as Alyosha seems to be doing. But Alyosha, I don't think Alyosha still has some struggles ahead, and they're not in terms of figuring it out logically. They're
Mm-hmm.
they're more like Kierkegaard's leap of faith, where you just sort of say, okay, this ethical parsing is not the way to get there. Ideology is not the way to get there. There's There must be another way.
So a few ways I want to connect it to the present moment is that it's like we're kind of living in Ivan's world, and Ivan might identify more with like a person who would consider themselves liberal, where you have like a strong sense of justice and not necessarily religious or having that transcendence, having that strong moral outrage, but not really having any solution with atonement or anything, just trying to get society to be better.
Yeah, well, I think you can be a right-wing Ivan as well.
Yeah, moral outrage either way.
Well, you're outraged. Yeah, you're outraged by the liberal policies, right? That are taking away what you think are the higher moral issues, and then the left has their own particular ways. Or you could be somebody that says, I can shoot a person on Fifth Avenue and nobody would care because I have made a pact with a higher power than which is not Jesus.
Yeah.
And
power itself.
I am power itself. And, it's hard being power itself. I have my problems. People don't understand me. They criticize me. I'm really the victim here. If you would just do what I said, you'd be happy. But I'd still be burdened with all these decisions. And the memoirs of these authoritarians. I don't. They're usually like Mein Kampf. Long chapter complaints about how hard they had it and how they had to take over the world to set it right because it was so much work. And they're not celebratory of victory. Mostly they're usually just my struggle. That's the genre. What I think is genius about the Grand Inquisitor is it shows both sides, Christ's side and the Inquisitor's side. And Alyosha points that out to him, that this is a two-sided story you're telling, that Christ returned, in silence and in service to heal the world and bring God's intentions into the lives of human beings again is still in that story. It's kind of a prodigal son kind of thing, with the prodigal son actually being the prodigal and not the father.
Mm-hmm.
Because the father figure that's running the world is someone who betrayed his own conscience because he was persuaded that power was the only currency. But in this novel, that hasn't been worked out yet in Ivan's mind, and it gets worked out at the end, sort of.
Ivan was obviously like Dostoevsky's fodder for the story to press the story forward with the philosophical elements and Alyosha's reactions to him.
You can read the letters that Dostoevsky wrote. There's some great letters, and one of the letters he wrote was when he published the Brothers Karamazov in a newspaper. So he was writing the chapters as they were coming out in the newspaper, and he hadn't finished the novel yet, and he'd still written like the first 10 chapters. And so he was getting feedback from the critics as the novel was being written and as the chapters were coming out. And so there were these chapters there were these critics that were criticizing Ivan Karamazov. They were criticizing Alyosha. The chapters with Ivan, he was writing to his brother, and he said, "Okay, I'm really interested in these chapters because they've been telling me that Alyosha and the Zosima chapters are religious tracts, and that I don't really know the suffering of the world. well, hey, I've made my way through faithlessness and atheism and philosophical nihilism. And I've known people in the camps that would make those public literary critics uh, poop in their pants if they ever met the dark visions of the world these guys live with. And I'm going to show them that in the Ivan chapters. I'm going to let them know that this is not any sentimental Christian candy pop. This is me facing the darkness and coming out the other side. And so it kind of made him mad that they would assume to know where he was going when he hadn't even unloaded his most challenging criticisms of his own faith, which is part of what you do in a polyphonic novel. You go to places that would challenge your own ideas, and you see if you have the power of intellect and imagination to respond to it credibly with a character that could be perceived as a truth teller and not just a made up um, robot for an ideology you're paid to represent. So that's why he's the real deal with the polyphonic novel, because he's setting himself up with questions he himself has yet to figure out, and then trying to answer them through that kind of a novel that is true and persuasive and powerful emotionally, intellectually, and aesthetically. And you don't have to be afraid. That's what Alyosha learns. You don't have to be afraid of the seeming contradictions in your life or in the world. If you have faith that there is a larger power that's in control in a way you can understand, but bigger than yourself, um, that is part of your world as powerfully as these minor little punks that are taking over because they know the weaknesses in the human psyche, and they exploit them to what they think is their own purpose, but it's really to their own demise. And Dostoevsky wanted to tell that story. And there's one letter where he says, what the Brothers Karamazov is really about love. It's about how you love in a world that seems loveless. And it's not a loveless world, and you know that, and you feel it when you're young. But then you get to a certain age, and you've been battered around, and you've seen the triumph of evil, and you've seen amoral people, and you begin to wonder, is it really the triumph? And then you have to trade Kierkegaardian ethics for the resurrected Kierkegaard of religion, which is the leap of faith. That is, oh no, these are transcended by resurrection, and resurrection isn't a logical solution. It's not. It's not the end of the dialogue through synthesis. That's Kantian categorical imperatives. The logic of behaving. If everybody else behaved this way, would it be moral? That doesn't take into account trauma. It doesn't take into account lies. It doesn't take into account fear and evil, and the false promises of Satan in the desert. And Dostoevsky does, in his works.
Thank you for listening to the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast. I hope today's conversation stirred something in you, whether you're a skeptic, a believer, or someone on a deconstruction journey. Come with us as we keep exploring what it means to seek meaning in a dehumanizing age, guided by prophetic voices who wrestled with faith and doubt, paradox and nihilism, because a prophetic imagination rarely speaks from the places we expect. It doesn't stay locked up in pulpits or seminaries. It breaks through in novels and poetry, charity, and art, through the strange and the quiet and the overlooked margins of culture. Thank you for listening. If you love our podcast or find it meaningful, here are some ways you can connect and share. Please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, leave a 5-star review, and share with anyone who might resonate. Please follow us on Instagram at Subversive Orthodoxy. You can email us at subversiveorthodoxy@gmail.com. And now you can find podcast extras as well as all of my other creative work at my Substack, beingtravismullen.substack.com. Thank you.
Spiritually, I wanna jump off a cliff without a parachute, like I'm high on cannabis, and skip through fields naked, like I wonder if I could drift or if I could drift through it, dancing through moonlight under night.
This has been the Subversive Orthodoxy Podcast with Travis Mullen and Professor Inchasti.
Oceanic scene. Say hi to human beings with a smile unseen, grabbing wildflowers as I slide down hills after a rain, after some